In a quiet suburban neighborhood of Seattle, Washington, the Henderson family lived in a modest single-family home. Karen Henderson, 42 years old, worked as an office clerk in a medium-sized company. She was known for her reliability and diligence, a warm-hearted woman who often surprised her colleagues with homemade cookies and always had an open ear for others' problems. Karen was down-to-earth and pragmatic, with a strong sense of justice and care for her family. At the office, Karen was the go-to person for many of her colleagues. Her calm, level-headed nature often helped diffuse conflicts, and her organizational talent made her a valuable employee. Despite the challenges that came with being a single mother, Karen always radiated an inner strength that inspired others. Her 16-year-old daughter Megan was an intelligent and confident teenager. As a talented musician, she played piano in the school band and dreamed of a career as a composer. Megan was creative, ambitious, and had a strong will. She and Karen had a close relationship, characterized by mutual trust and open communication. Megan's passion for music was more than just a hobby. She composed her own pieces and spent hours at the piano improving her skills. At school, she was a dedicated student who not only relied on her musical talents, but also excelled in academic subjects. Her teachers often described her as mature for her age, with a strong sense of justice and a robust moral compass. 3 years ago, Karen met Mark Henderson. The 45-year-old IT specialist worked for a large technology company and impressed Karen with his knowledge and charm. Mark was eloquent, confident, and seemed to be the perfect partner at first glance. He showed understanding for Karen's situation as a single mother and quickly gained her trust with his seemingly caring and supportive nature. Mark and Karen met in a local cafe where Karen often spent her lunch break. Mark, who was working on customer orders there, noticed Karen sitting alone at a table, engrossed in paperwork. He offered to buy her a coffee, and soon they were engaged in an animated conversation. Karen was impressed by Mark's intelligence and his seemingly genuine interest in her life. In the weeks that followed, they met regularly. Mark listened patiently when Karen talked about her daily worries and often offered helpful advice. He seemed understanding of her situation and showed flexibility when Karen had to postpone dates because of Megan. Mark presented himself as the perfect gentleman, attentive, considerate, and always ready to support Karen. When Karen introduced Mark to her daughter, Megan was initially reserved. She had reservations about the idea of her mother having a new partner. But Mark won her trust too by showing genuine interest in her music and making an effort to take on a fatherly role in her life. He attended her school concerts, praised her compositions, and encouraged her to participate in music competitions. Slowly but surely, Megan opened up to him and began to accept him as a positive presence in her life. Mark seemed to be the perfect addition to their small family, understanding, supportive, and loving. He brought stability and financial security to their lives, which Karen, who had been solely responsible for everything for years, greatly appreciated. His technical knowledge was often helpful with everyday problems, and he always seemed to have a solution at hand. After a year of dating, they married in a small, intimate ceremony. The wedding was a joyous event, with Megan playing a self-composed piece for the newlywed couple. It seemed as if Karen and Megan had finally found the happiness they had been searching for so long. The first months of marriage were harmonious. Mark integrated seamlessly into family life and supported both Karen and Megan in their respective endeavors. He helped Karen advance professionally by teaching her to use computer programs more effectively. He supported Megan by creating a professional website where she could showcase her compositions. But gradually, subtle changes in family dynamics began to appear. Mark started to take more control over various aspects of family life. At first, it seemed harmless. He suggested managing the family's finances, as he had more experience with it. Karen, who often felt unsure about financial matters, was grateful for his help. Then Mark installed an extensive security system in the house, supposedly to protect the family. He argued that there had been some burglaries in the neighborhood and that he was worried about the safety of his loved ones. Karen, who understood little about technology, trusted his judgment and was even grateful for his care. What Karen didn't suspect, Mark had installed hidden cameras in Megan's room and bathroom. With his technical expertise, he managed to stream and sell the footage on the dark web unnoticed. For months, his perfidious double life remained undetected. During this time, both Karen and Megan began to notice subtle changes in Mark's behavior. He became increasingly possessive and controlling. He questioned Karen's work hours and Megan's extracurricular activities. When they came home late, he reacted with disproportionate anger, which he justified with concern for their safety. Megan began to feel uncomfortable in her own home. She had a vague feeling of being watched, but couldn't explain it. She withdrew more and more, played less piano, and spent more time out of the house. Karen noticed the change in her daughter, but attributed it to typical teenage problems and adjustment to the new family situation. As Karen entered the house that afternoon, she had already had a stressful week behind her. Her work was demanding, and Mark's constant delays in coming home were causing additional tension in the family. Megan had also become more and more withdrawn, which worried Karen. The young musician used to be so open and cheerful, but since Mark moved in, her behavior had changed. She spoke less, often seemed nervous, and retreated to her room more and more frequently. Karen tried to understand the situation and search for an explanation for the mood swings in her home. Although she tried, she couldn't find a concrete reason. It was a mystery to her why Megan was suddenly so closed off, and Mark's behavior was becoming increasingly mysterious as well. He often seemed absent, his moods changed quickly, and he repeatedly made comments about the security of the house that Karen found strange and exaggerated. In recent weeks, Karen had also noticed that Mark was more often near Megan's room than usual. He seemed to be constantly fixing some technical problems that Karen couldn't quite comprehend. Mark explained it as the necessity to regularly check the house's security system. Karen trusted him and didn't give it much more thought. The intrusive curiosity that Mark radiated about the purpose of his constant visits was overshadowed by her own exhaustion and everyday stress. On this decisive afternoon, when Karen decided to go home earlier, she had no idea that she was heading towards the turning point of her life. The sounds from Mark's study were initially incomprehensible to her and awakened an unpleasant feeling. As she quietly approached, she wasn't sure what to expect. The door to the study was slightly open, and through the gap, she saw Mark staring intently at several monitors. At this moment, Karen froze. On the screens, she saw images of Megan's room and bathroom, taken from various perspectives. Her heart began to race as she realized what she was seeing. The scenes on the monitors were frightening and clear, intimate footage taken in her daughter's private spaces. Karen could hardly believe what she was seeing. The cruel truth was revealed to her in a single, shocking moment. The initial confusion and shock quickly turned into a wave of anger and disappointment. Karen stormed into the room, and when her eyes met Mark's, the expression in his eyes was cold and merciless. Mark's attempts to explain the situation were confused and incoherent. He spoke of security concerns and an alleged misunderstanding, but Karen couldn't be distracted from the obvious fact. He had exploited her daughter and brutally violated her privacy. The escalation of the situation was inevitable. Mark, realizing that his double life had been exposed, desperately tried to silence Karen. In a moment of raw violence, he grabbed her arm and threatened her. The threat in his voice was clear, and Karen felt as if the world around her had collapsed. Her initial paralysis soon gave way to desperation as she tried to find a way out of the situation. In the shocking realization that her daughter was in danger and seeing no other way to handle the situation, Karen reached for the nearest weapon, a heavy crystal vase that had been a wedding gift. The first blow hit Mark on the temple and made him stagger. The impact was devastating, but Mark was still conscious and fought back. The struggle that followed was chaotic and brutal. Both fell to the floor, and Karen, driven by fear and anger, kept striking. The thought that her daughter could be hurt by a man she had trusted drove her to a desperate fight. Each blow was an expression of her anger and her desperate attempts to protect her family. The desperation Karen felt in this moment was hardly describable in words. The fight continued until Mark finally lay motionless. As silence set in, Karen became aware of the full extent of her actions. Her hands were bloodstained, and her husband's lifeless body lay before her. The feeling of shock and overwhelming made it difficult to think clearly. Amidst the chaos, she took her phone and dialed emergency services while slowly going downstairs, where Megan, who had returned early from school, was waiting for her. Megan stood in the hallway confused and worried, having heard the loud noises from upstairs. Karen, barely able to stand, hugged her daughter tightly and tried to provide comfort, although she herself was on the edge of despair. The words, "Everything will be all right," seemed hollow and inconsolable in the tense atmosphere. When the police arrived, the whole situation had already spiraled out of control. Karen immediately confessed to what had happened, and the officers began their investigation. The sight of Mark's body and the disturbing evidence they found led to an intense and emotionally charged process. The true extent of Mark's crimes only came to light in the following days. Investigators found not only footage of Megan, but also of other minors from the neighborhood. Mark had developed a sophisticated system to sell the images and videos on the dark web. His activities dated back years, long before he had met Karen. The trial against Karen Henderson attracted great media interest. The prosecution initially pleaded for manslaughter, arguing that Karen had other options to resolve the situation. Karen's defense, however, argued for self-defense and protection of the child. During the trial, shocking details about Mark's double life were revealed. Experts explained how he had misused his IT skills to build a network of hidden cameras and distribute the footage. Former colleagues and acquaintances of Mark testified, painting a picture of a manipulative and obsessive man who knew perfectly how to maintain his charming facade. Megan also had to testify, a traumatic experience for the teenager. Her testimony, supported by a child psychologist, revealed how Mark had subtly crossed her boundaries and abused her trust. Her words moved many in the courtroom to tears. Karen herself took the stand as the last witness. In a calm voice, she described the events of that fateful day. She spoke of her fear, her anger, and her desperation in the face of the revelations. "At that moment, I no longer saw my husband," she said. "I saw a threat to my child, to all children. I just wanted to end it." After an intense week of trial, the court retired for deliberation. The verdict was awaited with tension. Finally, the judge announced the verdict: acquittal for Karen Henderson. In the reasoning for the verdict, it was stated that Karen had acted in an extreme, exceptional situation. The threat to her daughter and other children had been real and acute. Although the use of violence was extreme, the court saw it as justified to prevent further serious crimes. The verdict was controversially discussed in public. Many saw it as just, others criticized it as too lenient. For Karen and Megan, it meant the end of a nightmare, but also the beginning of a long healing process. In the weeks following the trial, Karen and Megan moved to another city to make a fresh start. The traumatic experiences had left deep wounds that healed only slowly. Both were in intensive therapeutic treatment to process the events. The Henderson case led to a broad societal debate about the protection of youth in the digital age and the hidden dangers that can lurk even in seemingly perfect families. It became a cautionary example of how important vigilance and open communication are in families, especially when it comes to protecting the most vulnerable in our society.